Thank you so much for joining the Center for Sustainable Business here at Stern tonight for this event on sustainable protein. My name is Jennifer Jacquet, and I'm faculty in the Department of Environmental Studies and affiliated faculty here at Stern. I teach an undergraduate course called Business and the Environment, where we learn that somewhere between 15 and 20% of greenhouse gas emissions are caused by animal agriculture. 70% of the grain grown in the US is used for animal feed. And the grain and alfalfa grown in California to feed animals, like cows, farmed animals, counts for 3 times more water use than almond farmers. If you're interested in the ethics tied up in animal agriculture, you should have a look at a book out by 2 of my colleagues, Chris Schlotman and Jeff Sebo, who are in the audience tonight, titled Food, Animals, and the Environment. And that's a course we also offer in environmental studies. Along with Yanula Athanasakis, who runs the Environmental Humanities, and Tansi Whalen and her team at the Center for Sustainable Business, we have put together this event to give you a sense of what's happening in the sustainable protein space, both in terms of investments as well as in terms of taste. If you haven't already, you'll get to try Ripple Foods, Miyoko's Cheeses, Good Catch Tuna, and Impossible and Beyond Burgers from Bareburger this evening. We're really happy about that, and there's a lot of red tape you have to clear to get those foods in here. So it's also impossible, speaking of impossible, to keep track of all the news in this space, like that White Castle now serves Impossible Burgers, or that Tyson Foods, which is the second largest meat producer in the world, is now an investor in Beyond Meat. And maybe some of you saw today the news about Omnipork, which is a plant-based pork company out of Hong Kong. The sustainable protein craze is global, and tonight we'll hear about whether or not it's here to stay. Are we saying goodbye to beef, milk, tuna, and cheese? Or will these products just feed some of the increasing demand for protein? Are they only ending up in elite markets? What's the global potential in the short run? And of course, what role are investors playing in this market? Our focus will be on the plant-based proteins that are already for sale rather than on cell-based or cultured meats, but I'm sure the panel would be happy to take questions on both. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then we'll get right to the panels, and then we'll do a Q&A afterward. Rosie Wardle will speak first, and she oversaw the launch of the Farmed Animal Investment Risk and Return organization in 2015, which is an arm of the Jeremy Coller Foundation. And FAIRR aims to educate and engage investors on the issues around factory farming. She's actually the reason for tonight's event, because I attended a similar event that FAIRR organized at this time last year, and that Neuberger Berman hosted, and it was the inspiration for this evening. I will say they did not have any sustainable proteins at that event, so this is like a version 2.0. Euripides Pelekanos has been called the Burger King from Queens, which I think is a pretty great moniker. He's the CEO of Bareburger, which gets at least 10% of my monthly salary. And Bareburger has added Beyond Burgers to their menu, and it was the first restaurant, at least in our neighborhood here, to serve the Impossible Burger. And again, those are here tonight. Jody Rasch is a managing trustee at VegInvest and is unique among our panelists in that he is a Stern alumni. And he's unique perhaps in this room because he went to Stern before it was Stern. He'll share his perspective on what it's like to run a vegan investment fund. Chris Kerr, who's part of New Crop Capital, will be last but not least. And he'll speak more in his role as co-CEO and chair of Good Catch, which is a startup doing both plant-based tuna and plant-based crab cakes. This is really exciting for me because I remember during grad school where I studied overfishing and fishing in general, that I was always asking at talks why there was no tofuna available. And this is way better than tofuna and better than I could have imagined, and it's happened in less than a decade. Finally, Tansi Whalen will moderate the Q&A, and she's here as the Director for Sustainable Business at Stern. And as we all know, she's a powerful advocate for businesses to adopt sustainability as a core business strategy. She'll lead us off with a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. We'll wrap around 7:15 is the plan, and we'll have a networking event, again, with the food, and we hope you'll get your protein fix. I just want to quickly thank, before we begin, all the people involved tonight, including our speakers, of course, Pete Cervoni, the chef for Good Catch, Kathleen Mandigo at Miyoko's Cheeses, Nicole Rodriguez at Ripple, the Bareburger team, of which there are too many, honestly, to thank, and Sophie Rifkin and Holly Williamson at the Center for Sustainable Business for all that they've done to put this together. And now I'd like to hand over the stage to Rosie.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for having me. Really glad to be part of this fantastic event. Cool, so I'm going to use my 8 minutes to try and frame this issue a little bit for everyone in the audience and ahead of our other panelists and the discussion later. So I'm going to focus on the scale of the problem with our current protein production system, why this is very important to businesses and to investors, and how we at FAIRR, which Jennifer mentioned is one of our initiatives at the Jeremy Coller Foundation, are using capital markets to drive sustainable protein production. So I'll start with this rather charismatic chicken. To give a sense of the importance of this issue, I mean, scientists, as many of you in the room will know, have proposed that we are now in a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene. And key, of course, to defining a geological age is finding global physical evidence of this kind of transition that will be preserved for future geologists to identify it. And remarkably, as I found out, it could actually be the domesticated chicken, which could serve this epoch-defining role, with its bones becoming key fossil evidence for the dawn of this new age, the Anthropocene. And that's because the chicken is now essentially ubiquitous across the globe. It's become the world's most common bird, with almost 60 billion individual chickens killed every year globally. And the vast majority of those are in intensive production systems. And to highlight this even further, I mean, new research earlier this year brought this home, really, with an assessment of all life on the planet. And they revealed pretty stunning figures, actually, about how biomass is made up on Earth. And farmed poultry makes up 70% of all birds on the planet, which was kind of incredible to me. And for mammals, it's a very similar story. So 60% of all mammals on Earth are now livestock. 36% of mammals are humans and only 4% wild animals. So we're really seeing farmed animals dominating globally at the expense of ecosystems, habitats, and other animals, as Jennifer touched on earlier. And I mean, clearly, this growth in farmed animal production globally has gone hand in hand with a huge growth in consumption of animal products. So growth of meat production, the graph on the left, this shows from the 60s onwards to the present day. A massive upward trajectory, but also in terms of the projected increase going forwards that is predicted from now until 2050. Estimates are around 76%, and that's driven largely by growing global populations and, of course, changing demographics in countries like China and India. And when you compare that to, the required decrease that the most recent research has really kind of illustrated, the contrast is stark. I mean, the latest out of Oxford University, Marco Springman, earlier this year, showed that we need a 75% decrease in animal protein production. And that's for the average global citizen. So the UK and the US need to go much further than that. So we're talking about cutting beef by 90%, milk by 60%, and increasing, on the other hand, consumption of beans and pulses. So the contrast between these two pictures is pretty stark. And what we also know, and more and more research seems to come out every month now, kind of illustrating this and evidencing this, is that the intensification of livestock production is presenting huge global risks to the environment, to human health, and to animal welfare globally. I mean, this is just highlighting some of the high-level issues that we see from, Jennifer mentioned, emissions, a huge contributor there, use of fresh water, driving deforestation, pollution, antibiotics. I mean, the list goes on, and I don't want to dwell too much on this because I think it's fairly accepted now that we've got a big problem here. And of course, these kind of global sustainability risks and issues then, from our perspective, translate into business and investment risks. So there's just a couple of specific examples on this slide, but companies receiving fines for pollution, animals being slaughtered in their thousands for, due to drought, and also things like avian flu epidemics. The US has experienced terrible cases of that. Share price dropping for specific companies involved in scandals around their supply chains. Again, the list goes on. But we're also seeing, which is very encouraging, opportunities here, and that is what we're going to focus on today. So we launched FAIRR in the foundation in 2015. We were looking at this issue and the impacts of livestock production within the foundation, and we realized that there was a big knowledge gap for investors on this. And so we launched FAIRR in 2015 as a network for investors to help them to really understand the types of risks and opportunities that I spoke about before. And Jeremy, our founder, he is an investor himself, and he believed and believes that although the intensification of this type of production has previously driven efficiencies and therefore profitability, actually now we're seeing a confluence of factors taking place, which is really starting to impact that business model and business as usual for these type of companies. So since we launched in 2015, we have gathered a network of institutional investors globally, many based in the US. These are large global asset managers, asset owners, the likes of Aegon, Hermes, Schroders. There's plenty of logos on there just to give you an example. And the combined support behind FAIRR right now is just over $9 trillion of combined assets. And that's made up of around 180 investors who are all starting to realize the investment implications of this sector and want to do something about it and gain access to our research and expertise in order to do that. So we at FAIRR are essentially, what we want to do is kind of use the power of these investors to drive improvements in the large global food companies which they hold in their portfolios, and really kind of try and leverage that voice, that investor voice, to create a more sustainable food production system. And so we both engage the investors to become active owners of the food companies that they hold. And then in turn, on the investors' behalf, we at FAIRR actually engage with the food companies to respond to investor concerns and actually kind of create some positive progress and improvements in what they're doing. And we look at the entire food value chain from the production end and how these risks come to the fore for the actual animal producers themselves, to the supply, the full supply chain down to the retailers and the restaurants. And we provide research tools, we facilitate collaborative engagements, and we coordinate things like collaborative investor statements to really add weight to these issues. So just to give one example, because we don't have too much time, but of the type of research that we do, and there's actually some of these reports at the back for anyone who wants. I stole a corner of the good catch stand. Sorry, Chris. But this is our latest research that we've put out, which is a protein producer index, so looking at the direct producers themselves, assessing the 60 largest publicly listed companies. They're about $300 billion in revenue combined, and we look at them against the 9 key issues on the right there and assess what they're doing against those issues. And I mean, unsurprisingly, they're performing fairly badly. Like, these are large meat, dairy, and fish production companies. 60% of the companies that we assessed were failing to even achieve basic management of these critical sustainability risks. We highlighted emissions and antibiotics as particular kind of red flags for these companies, that they're just not reporting or managing these issues at all. So ultimately, we want to really encourage, as a starting point, the companies to report on what they're doing on these issues, as a starting point to then engage and improve the actual practices within the companies. And very relevant for this panel, I mean, we, on sustainable protein specifically, have seen incredibly strong investor interest on this. And we in-house are facilitating a collaborative engagement with all of these companies on the right of the slide, essentially asking them as an investor group to look at their protein supply chains and build a strategy for protein diversification, because we don't believe they should be reliant on animal proteins because of all the risks inherent in that production system. And given the opportunities in this space, this is something that they really need to be thinking strategically about. So we're actively in dialogue with all of these companies, asking them what is their strategy on this issue on behalf of the investors we have backing this. And just to give you a sense of the story we tell, both in terms of engaging investors and companies on this, we identified these 4 key drivers of protein diversification. So clearly, there's an extensive market opportunity here. There's a strong demand for these products, which is growing globally. The risk to the business from business as usual is becoming more and more compelling as the evidence kind of distills around this. We have a huge and very exciting innovation revolution, which we'll talk about more on the panel, and potential for disruptive technology in the space that could really kind of switch how companies think about protein production. And we've got intensifying advocacy and regulation for the existing industry, which is putting pressure on how that's happening. And yeah, I mean, we really think that we're at the kind of foothills of a food technology revolution, if you will, here. And across these kind of categories of innovation, we're seeing lots of exciting things happening, and the potential for producing high quality, nutritious protein to feed the world is quite compelling. And we will talk much more about that, I'm sure, later. But just to give one example, I mean, we're not going to focus on this today, but if you think about the disruptive potential of cell-based meat to really change the existing industry completely, that is something to kind of bear in mind in terms of develops on the horizon that could come sooner than people think. We've clearly got the mainstream industry starting to talk about this and investing in these companies and being public about it, which is great. There's a lot more to be done there, I think. And this, I mean, yeah, it's great that we're seeing companies like Tyson make statements. We're seeing them start to kind of dabble in these areas, I guess. But for us at FAIRR, we really want to see companies developing a global evidence-based approach to diversifying proteins supply chains, because we think that's critical for their viability as businesses longer term. So we really want to see a meaningful strategic approach from the companies. And so these are the kind of 5 core components of our ask when we're talking to those companies that I showed earlier, the kind of the large retailers and manufacturers. We want to see, this is the kind of framework for a strategy that we'd like to see, which we believe is meaningful. And I mean, key, I think, is the tracking and reporting part, which hopefully we'll start to see more and more of going forwards, because although we're seeing companies develop strategies on this, they may be acquiring companies, they may be making venture investments, they may be doing internal R&D, but unless they are cognizant of where they see their revenues coming from in the future and make a plan to kind of shift that towards more plant-based protein, alternative proteins, then we don't think that's going to be robust enough as a strategy. So hopefully that gave you a sense of what we do, and I'm going to end there because I'm out of time, but thank you all for listening.
Can I just click right and left for the slides to move? Yeah? Okay. I'm the CEO and founder of Bareburger. We started in actually 2008. We had an idea, a few buddies from Astoria, to open up a really cool, small little organic burger joint in Astoria, Queens. It was a dilapidated bakery that we took over. I used to own a nightclub in Brooklyn for like 10 years. Had a blast. Man, those are murky days. Wow. We opened a really small place. It was 1,000 square feet. We had 45 seats in that restaurant. I was the original chef, overcooked every single burger that came out of that restaurant. Obviously horrible Yelp reviews for like 2 weeks until we changed things a little. This was the original menu from Bareburger, and I got to tell you, I saw this on Saturday morning for the first time in probably 7 years, and sort of missed simple days of a small menu and simple offerings. But we always had built our business on transparency and organic grass-fed beef and a bunch of exotic, I hate to say it, proteins and animals that we would serve in the restaurant, from elk to ostrich, which I still hear, some angry guests from like 2011 are still sending me nasty emails about why ostrich is not on the menu anymore. But, can't please everybody. But back in 2009, we had 22% of our bills were vegetarian burgers. A very small number, only 3% of the overall burger sales were vegetarian. 7 different meat options. We were very, very heavy on the meat options. Absolutely zero vegan burgers on the menu. That's where we were in 2009. Oh, this is going the wrong way? Let's see. Sorry about that. Fast forward 10 years, where we are today. I'm probably about 45 pounds heavier, a lot more gray hair on the side of my head, but still standing. Some changes in 2018. So I'll tell you a funny story. So I was watching a CNBC special on Impossible Burger before Impossible Burger sort of hit the marketplace, before it was in White Castle, before it was in Bareburger. And I reached out to Dr. Pat Brown and I said, hey, I was just like sitting in my office doing absolutely nothing but just surfing the internet. And I came across this video and I'm totally blown away with what you're doing. I would love to sample this and try it out in one of my restaurants. And he wrote back to me right away, which I was shocked, and he said, thank you for your interest. We're still in the sort of early stages of developing this product. But I'll tell you what, I'll send out, one of our team members in a few weeks with like an early sort of production of what we're doing. So this guy shows up to my restaurant with an igloo cooler packed with ice, and I thought it was almost like a kidney transplant, like a heart transplant. And he pulls out this frozen little pack of beef, plant-based beef, and he cracked it open for me, and it was as red and as juicy as any other burger we've ever sort of looked at in its raw state. And I said, can I cook this off in our kitchen? And he said, sure, be my guest. So I cooked it off. I invited our culinary director there and some of our managers in the restaurant. They all came there, and they were absolutely like blown away. And then for about 2 years, I was emailing them every other week. When are you guys going to launch this? When are you guys going to launch this? Because I just had a sense that it was going to change our industry. It was going to change the restaurant sort of landscape, and we wanted to be the first to serve it. So in 2018 and beyond, we were the first to be the first sort of fast casual chain to have Impossible in 40 of our restaurants. We were excuse me. We were one of the few restaurants to also offer the Beyond product. which we now also carry the Beyond broad sausage, which I think is one of the best tasting products in the market. We retired a lot of the exotic meats that we had on the menu, from elk to ostrich to wild boar to the duck, and we introduced 3 proprietary vegan and vegetarian veggie burgers to our menu. So now our menu, 10 years later, is 40% vegetarian burger offerings. 18% of our overall burgers that we sold last year were vegan, which is an astronomical jump from 3% almost 10 years ago. We have now only 4 different meat options opposed to 7, and we have 4 stable vegan options on the menu. Impossible launched its sales when it first came out. LaGuardia Place was lucky enough to be the first Bareburger restaurant to launch the Impossible, and it was absolutely mind-blowing that it was 21% of our burger sales, and sort of reminded me of when we had opened that restaurant 8 years ago, when there was lines out the door. You started seeing those lines, form again. So it was, really exciting for a business guy. We have, keep the lights on, and then Impossible became 7% of company-wide sales for all our restaurants. Some challenges. Pricing. It's an expensive product. We pay over $10.50. Dr. X, tell me $10.50 a pound for the Impossible. We pay close to $5 for organic grass-fed beef. We have 40 restaurants to run. It's a challenge to serve this product and to remain profitable. Awareness. They've done a tremendous job marketing their products, so the awareness piece is no longer a challenge as it was 2 years ago. The hype. Did they live up to the hype? And that's what we're sort of trying to figure out now. Was it just on the forefront of a hot trend and that it will fizzle away? I don't think so, because the sales have remained constant and they're launching in more and more restaurants. And I think they announced last week that they'll be launching out in the supermarket soon. In summation, 2009, 22% of our menu consisted of vegetarian burgers. 2018, 40% of our menu is now vegetarian burgers. 3% of our overall sales were vegetarian. Today, it's 18% of our overall burger sales are either vegan or vegetarian. 7 different meat options in 2009, opposed to 4 today. 0 vegan burgers in 2009, 4 in 2018. Overall sales, we do roughly about $100 million a year in sales, so roughly 9.5% of our sales are attributed to vegan and vegetarian burgers. Our year-over-year sales have gone up 8% in a sluggish restaurant industry that is slewed with a lot of challenges and competition and saturation. To be up 8%, and we attribute it to the launch of Impossible and Beyond on our menu, is phenomenal. We took a major leap this year and hired a vegan culinary director to replace our culinary director, who's actually in the back, I think, making burgers right now. Rudy, I saw you peeking. There he is. And to our surprise, we've won over a lot of meat eaters. We thought launching the Impossible and the Beyond would sort of preach to the choir, and it was a bit of a challenge to sort of win over carnivores and meat eaters, and I think we've done a good job with that so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good, thanks. So just as a little bit of an overview, yes, I am the NYU Business School grad in 1983. So it may, I say it doesn't make me unique, it just makes me old. Since then, I've worked over 40 years in international finance, having nothing to do with veganism, but having more to do with corporate treasury, corporate finance, derivatives, structured finance, subprime mortgage modeling, all the things that brought down the financial markets. I also worked at a rating agency, so, you know, you can blame me personally. I have a lot to make up for, so my vegan investing is why. But interestingly enough, my interest in this impact investing space actually happened at Moody's, more in the microfinance area, but that's when I started getting involved in the impact investing and coming up with non-financial ratings, impact ratings. So the question is, you know, why vegan investing? Obviously, the last two speakers have talked a little bit about it. No. I'm not as, you see, this is the other thing in 1983 is that we didn't have PowerPoint then. This one? Yeah, that's where I was going. Okay. So it's pretty straightforward why vegan companies should be of interest. This is, I think, Oxford University had one of their studies, and it's study after study. Veggie-based diets could save 8 million lives by 2015 and cut global warming. So that's why vegan investing. One headline basically says it all. The question is, why isn't everyone doing this? Oops. No, this went two of them. All right. Oh, I see. All right, so the question is this, from a social standpoint, yeah, it's a great market. What about from a financial standpoint? So we look at research that's done, Plant-Based Food Association, Good Food Institute, which Chris is also involved with, and they're just talking about the growth of the market. So the market is growing, it can save lives, it can save the environment, so why don't we do it? All right? So a lot of it is just perception and just the fear in the markets of doing something. When I used to be at Moody's and I would go to these impact investing conferences, I used to always fear when they had a speaker who was talking about sustainable agriculture because it always involved animals. And if you read the literature, using animals is ultimately not sustainable. And when you would ask them questions kind of afterwards, they sort of shyly say, yeah, I know that, but you know, I really need these LCs to give me money, and if I was like sound vegan or whatever, then they're not going to give it to me. All right. And again, so this is kind of just fits into that whole theory about, you know, this veganism and vegan investing is sort of a cult. So rather than fighting that, we just sort of decided to embrace the whole thing. And surprisingly enough, there were a lot of people who wanted to join our cult, so that was kind of nice. This is, we were defined as the vegan mafia. I was interviewed for this. And I guess it's really not considered good to quote yourself, but, you know, I sort of like this quote, so I figured I'd do it. That when people look at, well, vegan investing, well, you know, what's the next tofu product that you're going to look at? And we're going to go through what our portfolio is, and you can see that it's actually pretty high tech. Even things like the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger are pretty high tech if you know how they were made. And as Rosie was saying, you know, there's a whole bunch of non-traditional vegan investors or investors who are in this space, and these are just a few of the non-traditional who you wouldn't think of being a vegan investor being involved in this. So when we invest in companies as an investment fund, what we tend to do is we look at early stage companies. Now our investment philosophy is purely on an ethical ground. Our objective is to take animals out of the system. So that's our first screen when we look at different companies. So there could be companies that are vegan that could be very good companies to invest in, but it could be, let's say, a juice company that is totally organic, has lots of different additives or whatever that makes it really healthy. But if it's just replacing another juice company, that wouldn't be taking animals out of the system. So that's what we look at. Why we're doing this, particularly in terms of investing in the types of companies that we do, is how many public vegan companies are there? Hopefully in 6 months we'll have a different answer to this. But the answer is 0. So when you start looking at trying to convince people to give up their hamburger or give up their chicken or whatever else that they're eating now, the first thing that they're going to look at is, well, if I go to Bareburger, am I going to be able to order something when I go with my friends? So we need to start up these companies and get them on the road to being available. Because, talking about the mission and talking about the ill treatment of the animals, talking about the health effects, talking about the environmental effects, that's all well and good, but if you don't make it easy for people to convert and to find products, then they're not going to do it. So if you look at the types of companies that we've invested in, obviously Good Catch is one of them. We have everything from the cellular agriculture companies, like Mosa Meat, Blue Nalu, some of the companies that do the fermentation, such as Clara Foods, but also more traditionally, like Nut Pods, which is a non-dairy creamer, Shook, a restaurant, Veggie Grill, a restaurant, Just, which is doing lots of different things. So we run the kind of the gamut here. But they're all kind of early stage companies. And we also mentioned the things about price. The problem that we have with a lot of these early stage companies is that the market is not really developed yet. So what you end up doing is investing in companies where they are more expensive. I mean, one of the companies that we've invested in, and the woman who runs it is a very bright former Boeing engineer, she looked at the whole process of the creation of plant-based meats, and lo and behold, it wasn't set up for plant-based meat. So for example, a company that might be a co-packer for a plant-based meat company, when they're not doing plant-based meats, guess what they're doing? They're doing meat. So things aren't optimized for the plant-based world. So one of the things that we're going to have to do is develop new processes, develop new machinery in order to accomplish this. And so at VegInvest, we're looking at those type of things. Again, this is kind of the changing landscape, a lot of the different players, and you see they're both traditional players in the VC market and smaller institutions like ours. And this is the problem we need to solve. All right, is like, yes, I'd love to do the right thing, but if the burgers are 99 cents, guess where I'm going? All right, so I'd be happy to answer questions later, but thank you all for listening.
So I am actually both last and least, and I say that to lower your expectations at least a little bit. Cameramen hate me because I tend to pace back and forth, so hopefully you can put up with that. Is anybody else here feet soaking wet? Because mine are. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background. So I run a fund called New Crop Capital, and I became vegan back in 2002, so about 16 years ago. My beloved wife has been vegan for 30 years, and back in 2002, you two don't answer this. What do you guys think was the #1 most used ingredient in vegan food? Anybody know? Soy, maybe? Wheat gluten? No, it was disappointment. And they sprinkled a little bit of it on everything. As it turns out, I'm actually highly allergic to disappointment. And I believe most humans are allergic to disappointment when it comes to their food. So when I became vegan, what I really wanted to do was eat some really good food. I shouldn't say that. I really wanted to eat a grilled cheese sandwich. And that was, 2002 to 2008, I put most of my daylight hours into trying to find a grilled cheese sandwich that I could eat. And I found Daya. That was a company that had just gotten started out in Vancouver. We brought in about 1,000 pounds of Daya, and we ate grilled cheese sandwiches twice a day, every day for about a month and a half. Matter of fact, there's somebody in the back of the room that used to distribute, Demetrius used to distribute Daya. He would drive around, it was like delivering cocaine, driving around all through Manhattan, dropping off cheese to anywhere that people wanted vegan cheese. Anyway, I'm getting way off track here. So one of the reasons I got into this space was I wanted to become an activist, but I'm not a scientist, I'm not a chef, I'm not a writer. The one thing that I could do really well is I could eat food. And so that's what I focused on. I wanted to focus on things that I could use my palate, which is no extraordinary palate. It's the most average palate on the planet. It's the way I see it. I'm addicted to mediocre foods. And I think lots of America is addicted to mediocre foods. So I wanted to bring things that would kind of hit the center of the plate for what consumers were looking for, so that when you would go to a restaurant, you wouldn't have that veto vote of nothing here for me to eat. And I think that's kind of the Bareburger model. They don't have the veto vote. They don't have something that, they have something for everybody. And what we want to do is bring that into the mainstream. So, went to work for the Humane Society of the United States. We put a little bit of money into Beyond Meat, got that going, and then New Crop came along back in 2015. We started making investments into this space pretty heavily. We tried to invest into seafood, and there was no place to invest in it. And now, seafood is the most consumed protein on the planet. 40% of all protein that's consumed by human populations is in the form of seafood. So, let me go through my slides. I put this together today, and I have to remember what's on it. So when you talk about sustainability, I throw this up there because I think we all know we've got issues around seafood, right? Seafood has been historically something that populations have gathered for free. It's kind of a cross between hunting and gathering, I believe. So we become dependent on it. So you've got marginalized communities around the world that are relying on seafood, and yet we're having collapsing oceans. 90% of global fish stocks are overfished, and I think by 2048 that they'll be completely collapsed. Of course, you have animal welfare. About 40% of protein comes in the form of seafood, but when it comes to animals, individuals, you're looking at about 95% of all animals that are slaughtered for food are in the form of seafood. Human health, we're now inheriting the things that wild-caught fish are absorbing through living in the oceans, which are now polluted. So with every bit of seafood, you're getting a little bit of poison with you. And a lot of retailers are knowing this. You take Whole Foods as an example. They know when they're selling seafood to consumers, they know that they're selling you something that's actually poisonous for you. So everybody's trying to pay attention a little bit around this and saying, well, what can we do to bring alternatives into the marketplace that actually aren't bad for human beings? And then finally, we've got levers to pull around things like allergies, religion. There's lots of reasons why people avoid seafood. So there actually is a market for just plant-based seafood, regardless of whether these other things are bothering you. Let's see. So like I said, we got 40% of our protein is coming from fish. 3 billion people rely on it as the core source of their protein intake. We consume about 30 different types of land animals. However, we can compare to about 200 to 300 species of sea creatures that we eat, right? And that is all over the globe. So while we might focus on something like tuna here as a big species, pretty much anything that can come out of the ocean that won't kill you, you can probably eat. And that's what happens. If you look at species like the king crab, that was a trash species for a long time. Now it's a delicacy, but it became a delicacy because whatever they were hunting for, lobsters or whatever it was, the king crab came about. It used to be called the spider crab. Now it's the king crab. The Patagonia toothfish was renamed. Chilean sea bass, there it is, yeah. So it's all about branding. And while they're doing that, they're sitting there and they're killing off these big swaths of seafood at the same time until they find something else to replace it with. So we've got a collapse that's happening. Yet, here we are. And when we, as an investment group, wanted to go and invest in the seafood space, there was nothing. There's one other company called Sophie's Kitchen. It was doing very little in sales. Gardein had 2 products, both quite good, so we stole their head of R&D. And we launched Good Catch. And we actually didn't think that we would come up with a product that would be so great so fast. We got lucky. The fish gods were with us. And ended up with a great tuna fish, which hopefully you guys will taste later on today. It's a sector that right now is on the upward trend, and everybody says it's a hot sector. But there's still no places to invest in it. We're invested in 3 companies. Ocean Hugger, which makes ahi tuna out of tomatoes, low tech, but culinary innovation. Good Catch, and then a company called New Wave, which makes shrimp. And but we had to start Good Catch from scratch because we couldn't find a place to invest in something that was focusing on finned fish. And so that was why we entered into that realm. We didn't really want to have to start a company from scratch, and it takes a lot of work. New Crop is filled with entrepreneurs, so we're not particularly afraid of starting companies from scratch. What we are afraid of is that we have bandwidth issues, and we didn't like the idea of one company absorbing up all of our time. Good Catch has, but it's a really important holding for us. So this is I don't know what happened with the scale there. You can tell that all the other slides were made by professionals, and then I made this one today. It took me like a half an hour just to get that color blue. So this is what I call the food pack. So we make decisions on food based on price, awareness, convenience, and taste. We aspire to eat all sorts of ways. Like, that's what diets are. I aspire to be a fruitarian living off of seedless watermelon alone. But that's not how we make those decisions. If I'm on an airplane and there's nothing available for me to eat, I'm going to order the Pringles because that's what I can get. So that's the convenience, right? I would probably pay $15 for Pringles because I'm willing to pay that price because I'm hungry. So taste, price, convenience, and awareness. And I put awareness on there because it actually gets overlooked a lot. If you are crawling on a desert floor and dying of thirst, and just over the hill there was a bunch of water, you're probably still going to die if you don't know the water's over there. And the entire industry of merchandising is really about, in marketing, is about bringing awareness. How do you find these foods? It can be great that Impossible Burger or Beyond Burger exists, but if Bareburger isn't carrying it and they're not putting it at a reasonable price and it doesn't taste good, you're going to go do something else. And so what we want to do is focus on those 4 pillars. And when it comes to investing, we make sure that we're de-risking one of those pillars in order to bring things to market. But we always start with taste first. And that's why the companies that we invest in mostly are focusing on having chefs being the driving factor around them, which is what Good Catch was founded on. And then finally, why did we go to tuna fish? So shelf-stable seafood, 37% of all seafood by volume, shelf-stable. It's the second most consumed seafood product after shrimp. Canned tuna is the 3rd highest sales velocity in grocery stores, only behind sugar and coffee. And most importantly, and this is actually, I think, the biggest one for me. Right now, we don't have a plant-based meat that we can eat on the go. All of them have to be cooked. They have to be heated. You have to do something with them. All we have is jerky, and that's not a meal. So the idea that we could come up with something that you could tear open a bag while you're in your center seat of your economy flight to London and put it on top of a salad with a very healthy protein, that's what we wanted. And so Good Catch is designed around that. How can we make it delicious, convenient, priced right, and make people aware of it? And that's the overall strategy there. I think that's my last slide, and I'm out of time. So, yeah, there you go. Notice how I end on the last slide so everybody can see.
Yes, exactly. Hi, I'm Tansy Whalen. Let's see, how do we turn this off so I can see what? Thank you. And really delighted to have such a terrific panel here, really thought-provoking conversation. And I know we're all dying to taste some of these things. You've made us really hungry. But I want to ask a question to each of you and then open it up to everybody here, because I'm sure there's a number of questions they have for you. So let me just ask you, Rosie, in terms of your work at FAIRR, So there's a lot of rating agencies out there that rate ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors. Bloomberg has a platform. We've got, I think there's 150 data providers. More and more investors are looking for this data. How is your data showing up in those other investor platforms? And is it something that your average investor can find and use, right? How do you scale that up?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something we've done a lot of thinking about internally because I think it's key to amplifying the impact of what we do. I mean, when we started out, we obviously looked at all the offerings of all the research providers out there, like Bloomberg, MSCI, all the big ratings agencies and research providers, and we really found that to be honest, the knowledge of the sector and the data that they had already was very poor, frankly, which is why we saw this huge knowledge gap for investors. And when they were looking at whatever company it may be within the sector through those platforms, we didn't really feel that the scale of the risk was properly identified and reported on. So that's one of the real drivers for starting FAIRR, was because we felt there was a gap there. We want to integrate our research into those platforms, and we're actively speaking to Bloomberg, for instance, about doing that and seeing how we can actually just slot that in so it's already in there for investors. Right now, all of our research is open to any investors who sign up as a member of FAIRR, to which there's no fee at all because it's fully funded by the foundation. And then that's, all of our data and underlying research is available there. So we've done a lot of work to highlight the gap, I guess, to those research agencies, and we hope we'll continue to collaborate with them.
Well, I hope after tonight we'll get many people signing up on your platform. So, Euripides, I have a question for you. So you do serve meat still, right? So, but one of the interesting facts you had there is that 80% of the meat eaters actually try the vegan and vegetarian burger. So I wonder if you could talk about, I'm sure you've had interesting conversations about whether you continue to have meat, why you have meat, where you want to go with that. So I'd love for you to share with us your thinking on that.
It's a sort of an internal. Is this mic on? It's always been an internal discussion in our company. The dilemma for us to serve more vegan and vegetarian options and plant-based proteins, and yet to serve it side by side with beef and bison and turkey. But the sad reality for us is, we run brick and mortar restaurants. We have to keep our lights on. I think if we made that switch overnight and we, totally walked away from a lot of the proteins that, made our company, a local favorite in New York, I'd have a lot of franchisees, a lot of investors, who wouldn't be very happy. But we've taken those strides. And in 2019, we're sort of working on I don't want to call it it is a secret initiative, but it's sort of a 50-50 initiative where we'll sort of have one menu in all our restaurants that's your typical old school Bareburger menu sort of scaled down, and on the flip side of it, it'll be plan forward, sustainable, and sort of launch us in that direction. And I haven't been more excited in 10 years to launch a menu like that. This is where I get really excited, to launch new food and to put new food on the market. And I got to tell you where I think we won sort of people over. I was in Dubai about 6 weeks ago launching the Beyond Burger, and it was the first restaurant in Dubai to launch the Beyond Burger. And one of the operating managers there, his name is Fabrice, he was just like ragging on me the whole time. He's like, EP, there's no vegans in Dubai. There's no vegans in the Middle East. What are you doing here? This is going to be a massive failure. And then we were sitting in one of the restaurants in Le Maire, and I saw the locals come in with their families, and they were trying the Beyond Burger, and they were totally blown away, and that sort of fascination with them. And then, I called him last week, and I said, hey, how's the Beyond doing? And he's like, 40% of our sales now. So I was like, you owe me a little bit of money next time I come there, Fabrice. So that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, if I could steal it back. Thank you. So, Jody, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit. When you're investing in order to reduce the environmental and social impact through VegInvest, vegetables can also have an environmental and social impact, right? Negative environmental and social impact, particularly if they're grown at scale and they're, need a lot of water, destroy the soil, create problems for biodiversity, have labor problems, et cetera. So I wonder what you do in looking at your investments from that perspective, even though obviously they're better for the environment than meat. Like, how do you assess that as an investor?
Well, first, our objective is not environment, it's animal welfare. So, not that we don't consider that, but the first thing we look at is the impact on the animals. As far as the growing of crops, well, the first thing from an ethical standpoint, whatever, is we're entitled to live as individuals. So if you're going to live as an individual, it means most people have to eat. 9 out of 10 people I know need to eat to live. So then you go to the next step saying, well, if I'm going to eat, what is the most ethical and sustainable way to do that? And without doubt, the most ethical and sustainable way to do that is a plant-based diet. So given that we're going to eat, then what method do we determine to do that? I think the answer comes out pretty straightforward. It's a plant-based diet. So we don't really need to make that comparison, because if you need to feed animals, you've got to grow the crops anyway. And so no matter how you kind of break up the data, it's always going to come out that a plant-based diet is more environmentally sound than any other type of diet. I mean, you can, on the margins, look at, do almonds take too much water or not? But, quite honestly, that's kind of picking at the margins. The core of what we eat, it's pretty straightforward.
Thank you. And then finally, Chris, I wonder if you could share with us a bit why you think it's been slower for plant-based fish food to scale up. There's growing opportunities in meat or meat products. And what do you think it's going to take to get it to that next phase, and how soon will that happen?
A couple questions in there. I don't know why it took so long to kind of pick up. I think one of the reasons could be that fish has been seen as a health food, and that's a bit of a marketing play. Yes, there's things that are probably healthy in it, like protein, but is lead and mercury healthy? No. And you get the two together. I think what is interesting, like I said, you've got 30 land animals that we're eating, and really 4 of them are probably what most of our food comes from. When you have 200 to 300 species and you're trying to lop off those, that's a lot more targets to hit. On the good front, that's where the culinary arts come in. And so if you were to think about, well, I get to paint a painting, and you have a choice of 30 things to paint or 200 or 300 things to paint when it comes to the artistry around culinary arts, I'd rather have a wider palette to play with. So we actually think that could be really exciting. The ability to bring new products to market. Once you're in channels, once we have, as an example, Good Catch on the shelves, to add a shrimp along that or another product, crab, you're adding SKUs to the sales channel that are really good for an investment. So we're hoping that will help. The other thing that's important is that you think about tuna fish. Tuna fish is consumed everywhere in the globe. Everybody knows it. It's a dwindling stock, and it's consumed in different ways. It's a commodity that's consumed in retail, in food service, and as an industrial ingredient. And there's really no differentiation between one tuna fish that you might eat in Thailand and one that you might eat here. And so from our standpoint, we actually want to use that to our advantage. If you look at plant-based meats, we can actually brand a meat in the way that meat companies can't do it. You can put the word Tyson on a chicken and put the word Butterball on a chicken. It'd be hard for the consumers to tell the difference. But when you look at plant-based, you look at Impossible Burger, you look at Beyond Burger, there's a noticeable difference between them and what they're being compared to. All good, but you can brand them. And that creates a lot of value as well. So what we're hoping to do is demonstrate that there's more opportunities in investing in plant-based foods than there are in regular commodities. If you look at Maple Leaf Foods as an example, they're making one of the biggest pushes in this space right now. Their stock trades for one-time sales. but they buy companies at 3.2 times sales, right, in plant-based space. So the value of that comes from the actual increased market awareness of those particular brands. And that creates a great opportunity for investors. It also creates a great opportunity for consumers to be able to identify the foods that they're eating. So we're hoping that that will actually pick up a little momentum. I might add that the market has changed dramatically in the last 5 years, like leaps and bounds, and that's been remarkable. I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll say real quickly that there's something of a belief that millennials are driving this, and I actually want to give a shout out to what I refer to as the N-Gen. The N-Gen is the generation of people who are actually in the decision-making position where they actually control budgets and they decide what goes in front of consumers. So it isn't the millennial that's driving necessarily the consumer preferences inside a cafeteria at a university. It's the buyer at Compass Group that chose to go with a Beyond Burger to put it on the menu, and that's really important. That shift is what has just happened in the last 5 years, is that those really influential middle managers are making decisions that affect thousands and thousands of people, and that's a landscape change for us.
Yeah, the gatekeepers, really. Yeah, terrific. Thank you. All right, I'd like to open up to questions. And if you can state your name and your question, then I have to repeat it, unfortunately, so that we get it on the video. Yes. So what can we learn from the 1,000 years of people eating vegetarian meals from to today? And what are the new technologies that we can bring to bear now? And who would like to take that on?
Has anybody ever seen how tempeh is made? I'm pretty sure that was somebody who was starving when they ate tempeh. It's covered in mold. I mean, nowadays it's pretty good, but at the time somebody was really hungry when they first had a bite of tempeh. We have been eating plant-based meats, if you want to call tempeh a meat, which we do. I think what we're interested in looking at now is how can we blend different ingredients, different legumes, different types of peas and seeds in order to create something that's unique, but also familiar to consumers. And that's what I think most people want. They want familiarity. They want to, we get in these big battles with industry over how we label things. Well, we label things because we're trying to communicate that this product tastes like that product. It's pretty straightforward. And that battle is all about marketing. It's kind of a ridiculous fight that we're doing. But if you look at our ability to take great, innovative products, they really come down to breaking down the ingredients in things like pea protein. Pea protein wasn't really available until really the last 5 years, and even now, it's still a very small part of the market. We're replacing soy. Soy has been the #1 driver. We already knew about disappointment. We had that discussion already. I think that where we're going to end up with the bigger issue is people who in the marginal communities who don't have things like extruders to work from, right? And that's where, you're going to see people having to be a little bit creative.
Thanks. Yes, let's see. Yes, over there.
Hi, David. Two aspects. The first one is evolutionary. So we have canines. Apes don't have canines. The second thing is, from an economic point of view, investors. There was a report today that there's an E. coli outbreak with romaine lettuce. They can't find where it is, where it's coming from. But they do know that there was a bill or a law passed that farmers had to check their water, irrigation water, for E. coli. And it was supposed to go into effect in 2019. But the administration, maybe for economic reasons, decided to suspend that for 4 years. So you're working against what? A government that is saying we don't want to protect, because if you have an outbreak of romaine lettuce and people are dying, is that going to be a vacant?
So to paraphrase that, I guess, what's the role of government and also food safety and some of these issues, and also canines.
I'd like to take the canine question first. So compare your canines to a tiger's, I bet you lose. And if you look at the physiology of humans, it's much closer to herbivores than it is to carnivores, which is why most carnivores, when they eat meat, they don't get things like cancer and diabetes and so on, because it actually is more natural for humans to eat plant-based diets than it is to eat meat. And the other thing is, you talk about, well, evolutionarily, weren't we designed so that we could eat meat? And the answer is sort of, but it sort of misses the point of evolution. The point of evolution is to keep people alive past to child-rearing age. After that, evolution really doesn't give a damn what happens to you because you're pretty much useless after that. So now the fact that we're living kind of past just having kids, so we have some life left afterwards to enjoy, we're finding that from a scientific standpoint, the healthiest diet for us is a plant-based diet. As one doctor said, if Twinkies grew on trees, our ancestors would have eaten them. Well, of course, those are vegan, so it's okay. So that's on the first part. The second part about E. coli is kind of an interesting situation because one of the things that the news is not reporting about the E. coli outbreak on romaine lettuce, where did that water come from? It actually is runoff from factory farms, and that's when you have E. coli on vegetables. E. coli doesn't come from the vegetables, it comes from the manure. So the problem isn't the vegetable, the problem is, again, animal agriculture that's polluting. You have greenhouse gas issues, but animal agriculture is also terrible in terms of local pollution, and that's what's causing the E. coli outbreak. Now, that's why vegetable farmers need to check their water, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they're downhill from some factory farm. So that's kind of the problem on that side.
No follow-up, because we don't have that many people. Yes, take over here first.
Yeah, my question is for Rosie. I'm curious about what it's been like almost reclaiming the word sustainable in your field, as you touched on a little bit when you were discussing how subpar the other standards were. And if you could speak to what your experience has been over the years in educating people about the sustainability of plant-based protein versus animal protein.
So sorry, I have to repeat it. How do you educate people about the sustainability of plant-based protein versus animal-based protein?
Yeah, I mean, it goes to a lot of the other points made by the other panelists, but to an investor audience, I mean, in terms of a sustainability angle, the story is so compelling about both the impacts of the existing industry and also the opportunity from the alternatives. It's almost an easy story to tell. And if you look at it from an investor perspective purely in terms of the efficiencies and redefining sustainable protein to mean that which uses the least amount of resources and can actually produce high quality nutritious protein to feed the world in a sustainable way without requiring 3 planets or whatever to do so, then it's a incredibly compelling story in and of itself. I just think that story hadn't been told yet to the investment community. So we've almost just gathered all of that data and evidence together and just framed it through the lens of, the financial audience.
But I haven't gotten someone from this side of the room. Anybody? All right, yes, in the back.
What's the state of farm subsidies globally today, and how does that impact the ability of making the products price competitive for the masses? And what would you change, if there's anything that if it's an issue, what would you change about the farm subsidy formulas to make the products more price competitive?
So do farm subsidies have a negative impact on the work that you're doing, and how might you change that subsidy system to help you? I don't know if would you like to take a, I'll have your, or no?
Do you have stats on that?
No, not off the top of
All right, then if we're just going to make it up, I can do that.
Go for it, please.
Well, obviously, the subsidies make relative prices unbalanced. So, it subsidizes meat, and obviously it doesn't make plant-based foods more expensive, but they're relatively more expensive. So, when we start talking about carbon tax and the different methods that we have for reducing greenhouse gases, however, carbon trading and all that, you can apply the same philosophy to food as well, and whether you want to look at it from a carbon standpoint, which is very costly, whether you want to look at it from a health standpoint and the strain that all the preventable diseases like cancers and diabetes and heart disease that could be significantly reduced with a change in diet, what the impact of those would be, subsidizing apple farmers, subsidizing people who are growing yams or sweet potatoes or what, and I never knew the difference between the two, but any event. That would make, from a societal standpoint, that would make a lot more sense, because you have the issue of the commons where you get away for free. So if you have products that are doing harm, you don't pay for that harm. So rather than making meat producers pay for the environmental harm that they're causing, for the health harm that they're causing by putting tax to basically reduce consumption, we've kind of gone the other way and actually incentivizing them to lower their prices, thus increasing the impact on the environment, increasing the negative impacts on health. So it would be great if we could turn that around, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I'll add that overstock it creates a dumping ground. So you look at the dairy industry right now. Anytime that there's an oversupply, what do? They dump it in the school system, into the military, into the prison system. Government cheese. I mean, it goes to the populations that need it the least, are the ones who end up eating the most of dairy products. And so that creates a landscape in which things like non-dairy products can't even enter. You go to a school system and say, we want to compete on price, and they'll say, good luck, we can't even get close. That's highly problematic, and that starts at the Farm Bill, and I hate to say it, but that thing is nearly impenetrable. So it's a very frustrating place to be. So we rely on early adopters who have some price elasticity and are willing to talk about, their findings, and are willing to drive long distances to eat good food. That's how we enter the market and hopefully start changing at the small end.
Yes,
So I have a question for the Bareburger team.
Yeah.
I know your menu very well. And I was wondering about your milkshake or dairy products, and I know you're excited. I know it's a top secret thing, but just the two of us. So talk to me a little bit about the menu items, about which you might be most excited, or how you're handling dairy substitutes on the menu.
So could you share secrets about the dairy products and other cool products you have?
I'm a little disappointed because we've had vegan shakes on the menu for about a year now. I don't know, you haven't been paying attention, have you?
No, I know. I just want to know what else is coming.
So we're sort of revamping our milkshake offerings to obviously have coconut ice cream as our base and coconut milk. Sort of rolling out a whole new, simple, very tasty vegan dessert options. But what I'm really, really excited about is all the different burger builds and Beyond Dog builds that we're going to roll out, and more vegan options on the menu. And it'll literally be half the menu. And as we look at our menu now, and we have a breakdown, I think we have 243 somewhat SKUs on our menu. 120 of them are either plant-based or vegan or vegetarian. And I think it sort of gets lost in our menu now, the way it's sort of designed. And from us, from a creative side, and highlighting what we do for our guests, we're going to make it very simple. Here's one side of the menu that is all vegan. You don't have to navigate, through the menu. It'll all be there. And then I think the biggest challenge for us is going to be day-to-day operations, teaching our sort of back-of-house staff on how to handle the food, how to prepare the food, make sure that there's no cross-contamination with the grills and spatulas. I mean, these are the issues. I don't deal with the big issues. I deal with these small little issues to make sure a guy doesn't use a spatula to touch a beef burger with a Beyond Burger. So that's, Rudy's going to kill me, because Rudy told me, he's like, don't mention anything today, EP, about what we're doing. I'm sorry, but it's exciting stuff.
Great, thank So we're going to take one last question, and I know our speaker's going to stay around, so you'll have an opportunity for them to speak again. So, yes. Here, you want to go ahead, then I don't have to repeat it.
I know there's a new area of research that's been going on for a lot of years in the health realm about the human microbiome. And I know that there's increasing research that animal products are not favorable to our gut bacteria and cause diabetes and cancer, et cetera. But I'm wondering, as you're manufacturing these products and you're bringing high tech into a construct, something as a substitute, and it is high tech, if there are in fact any studies on what that's doing to the gut microbiome and if it's favorable?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of that in my basement, and I've been doing none of that. We focus on mouth taste, mouth feel, taste, texture. Is it palatable? I think we rely on first of all, we're not all high tech. Plenty of things we do are low tech, and I actually like the low tech a whole lot. We have a company called Wicked Meaty. It's just mushrooms. We just do really, really good mushrooms, and it's real straightforward. So we don't have to go high tech. I think the high tech is really for the consumers who just won't move. They won't try something new. That's me, by the way. I grew up on Philadelphia cheesesteaks, and that's, if I could live on Philadelphia cheesesteaks, I would. But we can create a Philadelphia cheesesteak with mushrooms. Like, we can get really close to that. So I think when you talk about the high tech, I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't know. But what we do try to do is bring a whole palette of options to the table, not just one. I don't know whether anybody else knows of any companies that have done palette or biome tests, but
no, not the biomes. I mean, they're just doing them more recently on other things as well. But I mean, they do talk about that a lot of these probiotics that people take, if you don't change your diet, you can have lots of probiotics, but the microbes, it's just a hostile environment for them if you're eating a lot of meat. One thing that I think we do need to be careful about is when we get more and more processed foods. There have been research done now on, we say vegan diets are healthier than animal-based diets. And in the extreme, that's true. A very healthy vegan diet is far and away the most healthy thing that you can have compared to, let's say, the standard American diet. But as you put more processed foods into the vegan diet and take out meats and all that from the standard American diet, there actually is a point where the two cross over in terms of health. So there's no reason why a vegan diet can't be healthier than any level of meat within your diet. I mean, that's also been shown when they keep on decreasing meat in the diet, there are always some health effects, even down to basically zero. But that doesn't necessarily hold if you're adding a lot of processed foods. So, the healthiest thing that we can do is just eat plants. Right? But let's be practical, that's not going to happen. So how do we reach more people to eat, healthier, hopefully? And then the very processed foods, they should be looked at as something that maybe you have occasionally, or as they're called crossover foods. And so that's, how people say to use these, and, whether people really do use them as crossovers or I had to yell at my son because he thought Soylent could replace every meal that he ever had, and going no, so those are some of the issues that we will have to deal with, and it's also a little bit of an issue because when we say that a vegan diet is healthy, and you get someone who goes on an unhealthy, very processed vegan diet, they'll come back and say, I tried this vegan thing and it just didn't work out for me. And then they say that to other people. And so we have to be a little bit careful about what we say about that.
And didn't you say Twinkies is vegan?
Yeah, and Oreos too. So we got it.
Well, I want to thank, first of all, Jennifer Jacquet for bringing us all together, bringing us this great panel. And I want to thank the panel itself for a terrific evening. And please enjoy.